Anyway, so that Florida trip was my first experience in on the road learning.
I see.
And I've gone from there on to all over the world. And one of my favorites is to visit villages. When I go to another country, to me the most interesting thing isn't the cities, they're all very much similar, but to go out into the villages and get to know the village craftspeople, and to get to know the village farmers and the children, and their life and their customs. That's exciting. And that was that experience was what convinced me that Servas could be a powerful educational program. And in the big, and when jumping ahead, when we were in Birmingham, England, we specified that Servas was not a hospitality program, but a work-study travel program, which is fundamentally different.
Right.
And the people that traveled used it would be fundamentally different. Well, from Florida, I studied what they call intentional communities. People who were not from rural communities but believed that was the natural, healthy way to live. And I visited a lot of communities in the United States, especially in the East where I was, that people had come from the city, they got a big piece of land and they developed a kind of a cooperative living on the land. I was visiting one of these intentional communities when the government came to pick me up and arrest me for not going into the army.
Oh, really?
I didn't...
You didn't answer the...
I wasn't trying to hide. I wasn't a draft dodger. I took a Gandhian position of a nonviolent refusal of civil disobedience against the draft system.
Right.
And the Quakers had, and some of the other peace churches had developed alternative service camps, but the government turned those alternative service camps into kind of prison camps in the woods. And here were the Quakers using good money that they should have used for other services to feed their boys living in prison camps in the woods. I wouldn't participate in that.
I see.
So there were several reasons I chose to take a strong position against the draft.
Right.
And but that was a great experience, believe it or not.
How many years in the prison, or how many years in the...
2 years.
2 years, I see.
But you know, that was a great experience, and as I look back on my life, every adverse happening turns out to be something constructive.
That's interesting.
Getting thrown out of my home got me on the road.
Right.
Being dyslexic got me out of the academic bind.
Right.
And then being arrested put me in a situation where I tell people the government treated me to an all expenses paid course in criminology with my subjects in the next bed. and I learned an awful lot from them. I told you about this carnival couple in Florida. That's nothing compared to the people in prison. I could talk for hours about some of the people who were in prison with me.
What do you mean, second time in prison? What?
Well, I got out after the first time. I was sentenced to 1 year and a day, and the judge used 1 year and a day because you get more good time that way. Good time means if you behave in prison, you get released a little earlier.
Right.
So after I got out, then like a crazy man, I went and registered with the draft board, and bang, I was back in prison again before I knew what hit me. So what I got was 1 year and then 3 years the second time, so that added up to 4 years, but I only served 2 years inside.
Right.
But now let's see, where was I?
You were in Kentucky in the moonshine.
Oh yes, oh yes. Oh, I could tell stories about them. I'll tell one that I like. this man was illiterate. And it's good I knew illiterates. That helps me with what I'm working on now. And I used to write letters for him because he couldn't write letters,
Right.
but he's allowed to send letters out.
Right.
And I'd read letters that came in. And one time he told me, he said, I used to make furniture. I would use, for the legs, I would use green wood, and for the rungs I used dried wood. And then when you put them together and the green wood dried out and shrunk up,
Right.
it would glue the furniture together better than any glue.
Really? Oh.
I said, that's beautiful. I said, why in the world did you do moonshine when you had a beautiful business like that? And he sat back and he says, I don't know. What he could have said was, it's our tradition. My grandfather made moonshine, and my father made moonshine, and so do I. He didn't say that, but I understand.
Right.
So those are the criminals I was serving with, such terrible people. Well, in the prisons I was in were conscientious objectors like me, who were pretty strong in their understanding and their beliefs, and I related to them all the rest of my life. They were, you read about them in the paper when there's a political demonstration in New York. They're some of the fellows that were in prison with me.
Oh, really?
As conscientious objectors. Yeah. Oh yeah. Bayard Rustin was very famous. He was African American, and oh yeah, we had the cream of the peacemakers. They didn't make peace entirely. They stirred things up so people would understand how terrible the system was and how bad war was. And oh yeah, I cherish knowing those people.
But against war, or against systems, or building a peace are two different things.
Oh, you are so right. I'm glad you broke that up. You know, one day we were sitting out in the grass outside the prison, in the field, and I said to these two young men, whose father was a famous war resister. I said, you know, we're here because we had to make a choice. But when we get out, we're not forced to make a choice. How much are we going to choose to make our lives building a just and a peaceful world?
Right.
They were angry with me because they had inherited their anti-war position. It hadn't come from them, their own
Family
soul.
background. Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Now, that's not true of all of them. There was a mixture. There's some dedicated their lives to working for a peaceful and just world.
Right.
And some, after they got out of prison, they went along with the system. But they were the minority, I think, that went along with the system.
Right.
Most of them were really caring people who carried through the rest of their life, trying to build a peaceful society. But because I'd been traveling around, I'd visited these experimental communities, I'd worked with the migratory workers in Florida. I'd had a little bit of...
Would you like some water?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I had a few contacts with the real world, I would call it. I had a better perspective than the others, so that when I had to make the choice, I didn't have any doubts. I knew where I had to go and what I had to do. And the funny thing was, the guards in prison were a little bit annoyed because I enjoyed my time in prison. It was part of my education.